I welcome you all to the fifth lecture of this NPTEL MOOC course titled Psychology of Stress, Health and Well-being. So, in the today's lecture we will talk about the concept of stress and infectious diseases. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let us have a brief recap of the lecture number 4. So, in the last lecture we talked about the historical background of stress and health research. So, basically we discussed how stress is connected to the physical health particularly, and we have seen that stress can lead to various physical and mental health consequences, and we typically try to understand that this connection between stress and health can be understood from the mind body interaction perspective, where the idea is the recent researchers have shown that mind and body are not separate entities, rather they are kind of one unit constantly interacting with each other. And this mind body interaction was very clearly evident when we have discussed the biological aspect of stress, and it was very clear how the mental experiences of the stress influences our brain, and then brain in turn influences various endocrine glands and secretes hormones, and which leads to other consequences. In the context of this mind body connection and the stress and health, we have also discussed psychosomatic diseases, where the idea is these are category of disease where that there are physical symptoms, but the causes may lie in the mental factors, or at least mental factors may deteriorate or worsen those physical diseases. So, we have many diseases in such categories such as heart diseases, diabetes, etc., etc. Then we have discussed, and also there are certain branches we talked about like health psychology, psychoneuroimmunology, mind body medicine. All these are basically a huge area of researches in themselves, and they are founded on the idea of mind body interaction and connection. Then we have discussed pathways linking stress and health, where we try to understand that stress influences physical health particularly through two mechanisms. One is physiological mechanisms, and where basically stress causes various physiological changes, and which in turn ultimately causes physical diseases. And the other pathway is through behavioral changes, where under stressful circumstances there are many behavioral changes that people experience, such as increasing unhealthy behaviors, decreasing healthy behaviors. There are changes in the behavioral patterns, such as there are sleep problems, there are issues with the food intake, smoking, alcohol intake. All these issues which are frequently associated with the stress can also further deteriorate physical health. So, these are primarily two mechanisms that can influence health, specifically when we are undergoing stressful circumstances. And then we have discussed particularly how stress is connected with the non-infectious diseases, where diseases which happens because of some malfunctioning in certain organs of our body, and in that context we have discussed cardiovascular diseases, which are primarily connected with stressful experiences. And we have discussed primarily stress causes various wear and tear. When there are frequently fight and flight response, it causes wear and tear in the muscles of the heart, and also the stress hormones promotes atherosclerosis, which is basically blockage of the arteries of the heart, and stress also increases cholesterol level in the blood, which also further leads to the blockage of arteries, and stressful certain behavioral changes such as eating unhealthy foods and other thing. All these factors can lead to cardiovascular diseases, particularly heart diseases. We have also discussed in that context type A and type B personality types, which are also connected to heart disease. And type A people are typically highly competitive, achievement oriented. There is a time urgency. They also may anger, particularly maybe suppressed anger and hostility. So those kind of makeup of type A people, and type B are just opposite. They are very easygoing and relaxed people. So because of the typical characteristics of type A people, they are more likely to experience stress. As a result, research shows they are more vulnerable for stress related diseases such as heart disease. So these are some of the things that we have discussed in the last lecture. Today we will talk about stress and health, particularly infectious diseases, in the context of infectious diseases. So in this lecture we will discuss the concept of human immune system, how stress is connected to immune system, what are the mechanisms of stress influencing immune system, and what are the implications of this research or findings. So we will look into all these things in today's lecture. So infectious diseases, as we have already discussed in the last class, is basically those category of diseases which are caused by external agents such as bacteria and viruses, and and they particularly influence our immune system. So if your immune system is strong, you may be less influenced, but if your immune system is weak, then they are more likely to influence our body and cause diseases. And these are mostly communicable diseases, in the sense that this kind of diseases may get transferred from one person to another person, because it is basically caused by external agents who can be transferred from one person to another person. So that is why they are called infectious diseases or communicable diseases. Now stress can influence infectious diseases by influencing our immune system. So an interdisciplinary field of research or field of area of research which is called as Psychoneuroimmunology, which is relatively recent, not very recent, but relatively recent origin. And this field of research particularly looks into this aspect, where they studies this relationship between psychological factors, neurological factors, and immune system. How psychological factor influences our nervous system, and then how nervous system in turn influences our immune system. So they try to see all these relationships. So this area of research is very important to understand the connection between stress and immune system. Interestingly, the birth of this whole area of research called psychoneuroimmunology was an accidentally was a result of an accidental research finding. So these two persons in 1970s, Eder and Cohen, they were doing an experiment of classical conditioning, and they were studying taste aversion using rats as their subjects. So before we can understand this whole research, let me give you a brief introduction of what is classical conditioning, so that you will understand this phenomena of basically what is their research is all about, and how it led to the birth of psychoneuroimmunology. So classical conditioning is basically learning by learning through association, in a very simpler term. So many learning happens by associating two things. So by associating two things, you may learn a new response. So that can be called as a conditioned response. So you will understand this. I will briefly give you an experiment that was done by Ivan Pavlov, who was a Russian physiologist who first discovered this classical conditioning phenomena. and he was initially doing research with dogs, and how he came to this phenomena was also very interesting. So, he was doing research with the dogs, basically physiological aspects of dog, and in their experiment what they found is that if you give a good food that is, for example, in the context of dog, let us say meat powder, when a dog sees meat powder, if you present meat powder in front of dog, the natural response is production of saliva in the mouth. So, this is meat powder is an unconditioned stimulus. So, it is not conditioned, it is a natural response that happens. So, this is called as unconditioned stimulus. Now, what he did, Pavlov, he introduced a neutral stimulus such as sound of bell. Now, this is a neutral stimulus. So, if you just produce sound of bell in front of a dog, it will not respond in terms of particularly production of saliva or anything. It is a neutral thing, and dog is not really concerned about the sound of bell. So, there is no saliva production. Okay. So, this is a neutral stimulus because it is not stimulating any specific response. Now, what he did, he associated these two things, paired again and again, and he tried to see what happens. So, he produced bell plus so, he associated these two stimuli, one is sound of bell, and immediately after that he produced meat powder. So, by seeing meat powder, the dog, there was a production of saliva in the mouth of dog. So, the dog was salivating. So, this was associated again and again, and what happened after some trials of association, they found interestingly just production of bell or sound of bell led to the production of saliva in the mouth of dog, which was not there in the before conditioning. Before conditioning, when sound of bell was not producing any response in terms of production of saliva. So, this is called as basically conditioned response. Conditioned response. So, this is a new learned response happened because of classical conditioning, because of learning by associating two things. So, before conditioning, bell was not leading to the production of saliva because it was not particularly stimulating the taste bud of the dog. But when meat powder was associated with the sound of bell again and again, the dog learned a new response that with the production of sound of bell, meat powder is going to come, and that signals production of saliva in the mouth of the dog. And as a result, just sound of bell without production of meat also created the same response as meat powder would produce. So, it is a new learned response, simply happened because of association of two stimuli. The dog learned a new response, that is producing saliva to a neutral stimuli. So, this is called as conditioned response or new learned response. So, this is a by and large the paradigm of classical conditioning, and such classical conditioning also happens in the human lives also. For example, many fear responses that we learn are kind of associated with learned by association. So, for example, if you met an accident by a car, so there is a possibility that whenever next time you ride a car, automatically there will be a fear response, because you learn to associate car with accidents. So, it is possible. So, many fear responses in human lives could be classically conditioned. So, they were doing a similar kind of experiment using rats and trying to see the taste aversion among the rats. So, this was the experiment which was not really directly connected to the immune system or anything. So, what they did was, a researcher gave rats a saccharin solution. Saccharin solution is basically sweet sugar kind of solution which is sweet taste, and it is generally, if you produce it, if you give it to a rat, they will love to drink it. So, they were creating a taste aversion to saccharin which was generally preferred by the rats. So, I will just show it in diagram and then we will discuss. So, and then what they associated this saccharin solution with an injection of a chemical called cyclophosphamide. So, they gave saccharin solution and then after that they injected rats with this particular chemical which had, or drug, which had an two impact. One was this drug induced a gastrointestinal upset. So, basically they were feeling like vomiting, those kind of intestinal upset was created by this drug. And there was another effect of this drug was that this drug used to suppress immune system to some extent. So, when this saccharin solution was given to the rat along with this injection of drug, they learned to avoid saccharin. So, they learned a new response whose saccharin which they earlier used to prefer, now when it was associated with a drug which caused stomach upset, then after that they learned to avoid saccharin solution because of association with a drug which caused problem, the stomach problem. So, if you just show it, I will show it just like that. So, saccharin solution, if you generally give to a rat, they generally prefer, or rat generally prefer the taste of it. Now, when, so this was kind of natural response. Now, when, so they, another thing was the drug which was called as now it does two things. One is gastrointestinal upset, plus so this two function is to be done by this thing. So, when the researcher combined these two, again and again, I mean so this was a kind of classical conditioning. Initially saccharin solution rat preferred it. Now, when it was combined with a drug which caused stomach upset, the rat learn to avoid it. So, this is a classical conditioning or of a taste aversion. So, this was the research that they did. Interestingly, what they found, which was kind of accidental finding, that when this saccharin was forced fed, so since they learn to avoid it, but instead of that, in order to complete their research whole protocol, they forced fed them by using a dropper. They avoided it, but still the researcher forced fed this saccharin solution. The interesting, they kind of found that many rats actually died after this force feeding thing. So, this was kind of an unusual finding. Just by feeding saccharin, how could a rat die? So, they hypothesized that it is possible that this saccharin was conditioned not just to the gastrointestinal upset. So, because of that they learned to avoid it. So, there was an upset, so they learned to avoid saccharin, but also the other effect of the drug, which was suppression of immune system. So, it was possible that rat also classically conditioned to the suppression of immune system of that drug. So, saccharin was conditioned to that functions of the that suppression of immune system of the drug was also conditioned to the saccharin. So, when saccharin was given or forced fed, many rats died, and the amount and it was dependent on the amount of solution that was given. Higher the amount was given, higher the death rate. So, it was kind of they hypothesized that not just gastrointestinal upset was conditioned to the saccharin, but the immune suppression was also kind of conditioned to the saccharin. So, when saccharin was given to them, force fed to them, there was a signal in the in the brain or the nervous system of the rat that rat, and which kind of suppress the immune system, which was earlier done by that drug. So, it was learned by association. Now, saccharin was almost acting like the qualities or the characteristics of that particular drug. So, now you will be able to understand some of this what is written in the slide. So, the researcher, they were giving rats a saccharin solution which was sweet taste, accompanied by injection of cyclophosphamide, which had an immunosuppressive impact, along with it induces gastrointestinal upset. So, when this injection was stopped, the rats had become conditioned to avoid consuming the sweet solution. So, when it was stopped, the rat learned to avoid it simply because of association with that drug. To complete the experimental protocol, this researcher forced the rat to take the saccharin solution using eye drops. So, forcefully fed, and surprisingly they found, or observation they made, was that some of these rats which were force fed, they died with the saccharin solution alone only. By giving saccharin solution, they died. And they also found that the magnitude of the avoidance response and the mortality rate of the rat was directly related to the volume of the solution consumed. So, as the volume of the solution increased in terms of force feeding them, their avoidance response and the mortality rate was also in proportion to that. So, they hypothesized that conditioning of immunosuppressive effect was happening in addition to the conditioning of the taste avoidance response. So, there kind of double conditioning happened. So, they added that the taste of saccharin alone was enough to stimulate neural signals that suppress the rat's immune system, just as they had been overdosed with the immunosuppressant. So, as if saccharin was acting like as if they were given high dose of immune suppressive drugs. They later found that behavioral conditioning process could suppress immune response as measured by antibody concentrations, revealing connections between the brain and immune system. And the later obviously they found many research confirmed even in animals and humans that in fact the psychological factors can particularly the negative emotions and the stress can signal brain to suppress immune system. So we will see some of the later findings now. So before we understand how stress impact immune system, let us briefly understand what is the immune system is all about. So immune system basically protects us from infections and illness from outside microorganisms. So it's a kind of body's defense mechanism. So it protects body from microorganisms, harmful substances that comes into our body. And immune system is very complex, particularly in the human body it is very complex and very sophisticated, and it's a very coordinated system. So key players in the immune systems are white blood cells. So blood cell, red blood cell, white blood cell. So white blood cells are primarily responsible for immune system of the body, which are also called as lymphocytes. One type of white blood lymphocytes are primarily the key player in our immune systems. So there are mainly two types of lymphocytes. One is called as B cells and T cells. Broadly, they are primarily serving the immune system or protecting our body from the outside agents. So let me briefly just draw. So we have white blood cells, or particularly lymphocytes. So they have two specific cells called B cells, and then we have T cells. B cells basically they secrete antibodies. T cells are basically they recognize specific infected or cancerous cells. The B cells, whenever there is an antigen or external agent, they create an antibody to fight with that. Antibodies basically are produced in the body to fight with specific external agents. T cells, they are more specialized in terms of recognizing infected cells and cancerous cells, and in terms of fighting with them. T cells are again of two types. One is called as helper cells, helper T cells, and then we have killer T cells. Helpers are also they are called as CD4 cells, and they are called as CD8 cells. So helper T cells basically they coordinate immune response. Killer T cell they directly attack. Cells carrying foreign materials. Okay. So these are major immune system, the cells which are responsible for immune functions. So primarily the lymphocyte component of the white blood cells. They have again two types of cell. One is B cells, which secretes antibodies in response to external agents to fight with, and T cells are basically there specifically they recognize some specific cells such as cancerous cells or infected cells, and they kind of attack. And T cells are again two types. One is helper T cells, which basically kind of coordinate immune response from different parts of the body. So they kind of sends messages and coordinates. Killer cells are basically they directly attack whenever they find some infected cells carrying some foreign harmful material. So as we have already discussed, B cell secretes antibodies into the body fluids to destroy antigens. Each B cell produce specific antibody when triggered by an antigen. So it can recognize free floating antigen. T cells they recognize specific infected or cancerous cells. Then T cells are of two types. One is helper T cells and killer T cells. Helper T cells, they are also known as CD4 cells. They coordinate immune response by communicating with other cells. So this coordination purpose they do, so that wherever whatever resource is required, they kind of coordinate. Killer T cells, they are also called as cytotoxic T lymphocytes or CD8 cells. They directly attack other cells carrying certain foreign or abnormal molecules on their surfaces. The other major component include natural killer cells, phagocytes and cytokines. We will not go into too much of that aspects. So, but these are major components of immune system. Important organ where these are the storehouse of immune cells are bone marrow. So inside bone we have soft tissues. There majority of the immune cells are kind of concentrated there. Thymus, another organ which lies behind the breastbone, and spleen, which is a flattened organ at the upper left of the abdomen. So these are the organs where the immune cells are primarily concentrated in our body, and that is bone marrow, thymus and spleen. Now we will talk about some of the research findings related to stress and immune system. So Hans Selye suggested that we have already seen in the discussion of general adaptation syndrome. Hans Selye in 70s he suggested that stress actually globally suppresses our immune system. Globally means all functions of immune system, and he proposed in one of the first model of general adaptation syndrome, and he found that in the stage of exhaustion, which is the third stage of general adaptation syndrome, that the body runs out of the reserve energy. When it is the body is under chronic stress, the body runs out of the reserve energy, and immunity of the body is deteriorated at this stage, and it causes various diseases, and even it may cause death. So Hans Selye in the 70s he talked about how stress is connected to immune system, particularly under chronic stress, and the third stage of exhaustion, immune system deteriorates. So many early studies have supported Selye's findings by reporting association of chronic stress with decrease in many immune cells such as natural killer cell, suppression of lymphocyte response. So overall various immune functions or cells were suppressed by stress. It was found by many studies also later after Selye's initial finding. In the early 1980s, another kind of study that very clearly reflects how stress can influence our immune system was conducted by Janis Kekold Glasser, and he was a psychologist, and another immunologist, Ronald Glasser. And they were studying how especially they were doing research with the animals initially, and they got intrigued by those researches that linked stress with infection, that how infection kind of increases under stress. So they were doing a lot of research in that connection, and they from 1982 through 1992, so 10-year time, they studied medical students, and they found that students' immunity went down every year under the simple stress of the 3-day exam period. So they found consistently that in medical students during the period of their exam, particularly 3-day exam period, immune system of most of the students went down during those period. Students had less number of natural killer cells, which fights tumors and viral infections. They also had fewer infection fighting T cells. So there was also another study that shows how under stress, particularly during the exam period, suddenly the stress rises, and they found that with the rise of that stress, many immune cell functions were suppressed. Another study by Pressman and Cohen in 2005 found that social isolation and feelings of loneliness each independently weakened first year students' immunity. So students' immunity, particularly social isolation, because when a first year student they come, mostly they don't have too many friend circles, and the social isolation and feelings of loneliness also actually weakened their immune system. And we know that social support is very important in terms of reducing stress. So it's an important coping strategy that we will discuss in when we discuss the coping strategies in the upcoming lectures. So loneliness or social isolations are most of the time associated with higher intensity of stress and higher number of stressful circumstances. So that also indirectly kind of shows. So in this study, basically the students were basically checked their social networks, and it was kind of they also provided saliva samples for measuring levels of stress hormone, particularly the cortisol can be measured from the saliva sample, and they found the small network and loneliness each independently weakened immunity, and also the immune response was most weakened by the combination of loneliness and small social network. When these two are present together, obviously, and it had the highest impact. And it was a kind of most obvious thing for the first year students, because when they just join, obviously their social networks was small, social support system was small. So all this increased their stress and ultimately their immune system also. Now, many studies actually conducted, and it kind of a floodgate of research opened in 80s and 90s, particularly after research of Glasser and Hansel is finding. So another findings by Dhabar and McQueen, they proposed a model based on findings from various researches. The model called as Biphasic Model, which takes into account of different types of stress and how different types of stress influences our immune response. Not just stress in general, but is it that different types of stress influences our immune system differently? So this model states that based on the evidences, they stated that acute stress enhances while chronic stress suppresses immune system. So this biphasic model proposed that actually the acute stress, which is for short term, which is just after when you see a danger or threat, you experience fight or flight response. So in that phase, actually immune system actually increases in the body, which is done by redistribution of the immune cells, because body gets prepared and it redistributes immune cells throughout the body and enhances immune function. However, when the stress becomes chronic for a long time, so let us say weeks and months somebody is experiencing stress, such stress actually are the main culprit in terms of suppression of immune system. So, chronic stress exhausts resources and weakens immune system. So, if you just look at it, we have discussed at different times. So we can divide it into acute, and chronic. So actually this seems to increase immune functions. This decreases immune function. This was a kind of general finding they found, that depending on the type of stress, immune functions could be there can be a differential impact on that. So in 2004, two researchers, Segerstrom and Miller, in 2004 they conduct an extensive meta-analysis. So meta-analysis basically it's an analysis of the already analyzed studies. So it's an analysis of the analysis. That is why it is called as a meta-analysis. So already existing empirical studies, about 293 independent studies, and which reported the connection between stress and health, and stress and immune system. Sorry, and they which were studies from 1960 to 2001. So these were the studies they collected, and they did an analysis of all these studies, and they tried to see what is the direction of results. So analysis of the results confirmed that stress changes immune system, immune functions. So that was very clear. The result of the meta-analysis was in line with the proposition of the Biphasic model, which proposed that that short-term stress or acute stress may actually enhance immune functions as an adaptive response, but chronic stress actually suppresses immune function as a result of too much exhaustions of the body resources. So that their finding was in line with the Biphasic model that was proposed. However, also they made very finer analysis. More specifically, they found that acute time limited stressors, such as public speaking, it's a very time limited acute stress for a particular time, enhance natural immunity, that is defensive again non-specific foreign invaders. So general immunity was enhanced by such activities. However, some aspects of specific immunity attack specific invaders which were suppressed. So general natural immunity was increased, but some specific immunity was suppressed by acute time limited stressors, such as public speaking. They also found that focal stressful events such as natural disaster or loss of spouse was not that strongly associated with immune changes when taken as a whole, but they found specific categories such as loss of a spouse was associated with decline in natural immune response. Overall, it was not that strongly connected, but it was associated with the decline in natural immune response. Focal events such as natural disaster. And they found chronic stressors such as living with a handicap, dementia caregiving, and unemployment have negative effects on almost all measures of immune functions, both a natural and specific immunity, irrespective of demographic variables such as age, gender, etc. So this is the category which is most damaging to our immune system. Chronic stress, for months and years you are experiencing stress and you don't see an end to it. When such an when it is going to end? So such stressful stressful circumstances are uh, the, the mostly has a negative impact on our immune system. Further, this meta-analysis also showed that older and sick people are more vulnerable to stress-related immune changes, and obviously because older and sick people are already their immune system is already compromised. It is not functioning at its peak. So any further changes or decline in that can be highly disastrous in terms of health. So research shows all these kinds of findings, and it was clear that stress has an impact on our immune system. Now the question is, what is the mechanisms by which stressful circumstances or stressful experiences impacts our immune system? So one obvious finding is obviously stress hormones are the linking mechanism between stress and immune function. So the relationship between stress and immune function is very complex, obviously, and this is what we still don't know most of it, but at least whatever we know shows there is an impact, and many mechanisms are yet to be discovered. However, research indicated that stress hormones and the pathways we have already discussed in detail, such as cortisol, epinephrine or adrenaline, and norepinephrine or noradrenaline. These stress hormones can make us more resistant to stressor in short term, like acute stress. It enhances immune function to protect the body, but they actually impair immune system in long term. So chronic stress, under the condition of chronic stress, they impairs our immune function. For example, Talbot and Creamer in 2007 found that one stress hormone, that is cortisol, they found that cortisol hinders the production as well as the activity of white blood cells. So all the immune functions cells they hinders their functioning and the production. So in that way it decreases, and cortisol, you might remember, it is primarily released in terms of chronic stress. Then cortisol also suppresses white blood cells to produce chemical messenger that facilitate communication with other immune cells. So it also suppresses this communication between immune cells also, and so in that way also it hinders immune functions. Cortisol can also signal many immune cells to shut and stop working. So it can shut and stop, it can signal and reduce the production and functioning of different kinds of immune cells. So these are some of the indications that how stress hormones can be related to the suppression of immune function. And obviously there are behavioral pathways apart from these hormones. Research also indicated that behavioral component which is always associated with the stressful experience can have a detrimental effect on immune functions, particularly the behavioral aspects of stress, such as excessive drinking of alcohol, lack of exercise, inactivity, sleep difficulties. These are all connected with the decrease in the production of immune functions or decrease in the immune functions. So stress can directly reduce immune function or suppress immune function through release of stress hormones, or indirectly by behavioral changes which further has a detrimental effect on immune function. So what are the implications of these research findings? So one thing is clear, stressful circumstances decreases immune function. So if that is the case, one implication of this finding is that if you do something or some intervention which reduces stress or which relaxes us, or any intervention that increases relaxation response, because relaxation is opposite to stress. So if stress decreases immune function, so if we increase the relaxation response or some intervention which has a positive impact on our emotional or mental health, that should increase our immune function. And in fact, many studies are started to indicate researches in that direction. So, one important implication of these findings are that interventions aimed at stress reduction, such as particularly chronic stress, such as relaxation, emotion regulation, social support, etc., may actually decrease immune suppression function and actually increase immune function in terms of fighting germs. And some research indicate that a relaxation response may actually elicit this or kind of induce product secretion of some chemicals which are health promoting, such as DHEA, which basically means dehydroephedrosterone, which kind of promotes health. So, relaxation response actually secretes such helpful chemicals. And further, the use of self regulation technique that calms the mind lowers the activity of sympathetic nervous system response to stress and promotes healing process. So, relaxation response overall calms down the body, and and it seems to have positive impact on our immune function also. For example, in this year only, very recently, one meta-analysis was done on 56 studies or randomized trials, which had about more than 4,000 participants in it, and they found that psychosocial interventions such as cognitive behavior therapy were associated with the positive changes in the immune system over time, including improvements in the beneficial immune system functions. So, it indicates that at least so any intervention to reduce stress and increase our mental and emotional health can actually increase immune function, and it is shown by a meta-analysis, the many studies kinds of indicate towards that. And this enhanced immune system is not short term actually, and it actually persisted for at least 6 months following those treatments for participants. So, it is a long lasting effect also. So, generally what happens, these psychotherapies are aimed at reducing stress and it enhances our emotional and mental health, and such intervention actually not only promotes our mental and emotional health, they also actually increase our immune functions in terms of physical health. So, therefore, this studies indicates that stress management and working towards increasing our emotional health can increase our immune functions, and these immune functions could be long lasting also. So, these are some of the important findings and implication of those findings in the context of connection between stress and immune functions and stress and infectious diseases. So, you can understand stress has so much role to play in our physical health, not just mental health. We will talk about mental health in the next lecture. So, it has such an important implications for both kinds of disorders, physical diseases, infectious as well as non-infectious diseases. So, we need to understand the importance of our mental experiences, particularly negative emotions and stress, and we will see more how to deal with that in the coping strategies sections when we discuss in the upcoming classes. So, with this I end today's lecture. Thank you.